Sirens wailed through the quiet, manicured streets of Brentwood, shattering the midnight calm. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off a pristine silver sedan, signaling the start of a nightmare. Nobody could have predicted that one arrogant patrolman's routine traffic stop was about to dismantle his entire career and life. The dashboard clock in the 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class read 11:42 p.m. Sarah Covington exhaled a long, exhausted breath, letting the heated leather seat soothe the dull ache in her lower back. It had been a grueling 72 hours. As a sitting United States District Judge for the federal court, Sarah had just presided over a marathon racketeering trial that ended in a complex, multi-defendant conviction. Eager to shed the heavy black robes and the suffocating formality of the courtroom, she had retreated into her weekend sanctuary, an oversized, faded Yale Law sweatshirt, a pair of worn-out gray sweatpants, and a messy bun. She was merely 3 miles away from her 6-bedroom estate in Brentwood, a highly affluent, predominantly white suburb known for its sprawling lawns, iron gates, and an overzealous police department. Sarah loved her home, but she was acutely aware of the invisible boundaries drawn around her as a black woman in a town that still clung to outdated demographics. Tonight, she just wanted a hot shower and a glass of Pinot Noir. 2 miles behind her, Officer Bradley Harrison was fighting off boredom. Harrison was a 12-year veteran of the Brentwood Police Department, a man whose career had been stalled by multiple excessive force complaints and a well-documented history of attitude problems. He was a broad-shouldered man with a closely shaved head and a constant, simmering sneer. A man who viewed the badge not as a shield for the public, but as a personal weapon. Harrison's cruiser idled in the shadows of an abandoned gas station when the silver Mercedes glided past. His eyes narrowed. He pulled out, keeping a distance, running the plates through his onboard computer. The vehicle was registered to a Cess Covington at a high-end Brentwood address. Harrison accelerated, pulling up closer to the driver's side blind spot to get a look at the operator. Through the lightly tinted glass illuminated by the street lamps, he saw a black woman in a faded sweatshirt. In Harrison's prejudiced mind, the math was simple and deeply flawed. A black woman looking like she just rolled out of bed did not belong in a $100,000 car in Brentwood at midnight. Stolen vehicle, he thought, or perhaps drug runner. The fact that the tags came back clean and registered to an address just up the road didn't matter. Harrison was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut was overwhelmingly fueled by racial bias. He flipped the switch. The silent, dark street was instantly bathed in strobing red and blue. Sarah glanced in her rearview mirror. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. She immediately took her foot off the accelerator, activated her right turn signal, and smoothly pulled over onto the shoulder beneath a bright streetlight, a safety measure she had practiced her entire life. She shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows. Then, she placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. She wasn't frightened, but she was deeply irritated. As a federal judge, she knew the law intimately. She knew she had committed no moving violation. She had not been speeding. She had maintained her lane. Her taillights were perfectly functional. In her center console sat her federal judicial credentials, a leather-bound badge and identification card that would instantly send any local cop into a tailspin of apologies. But as she watched Officer Harrison approach her vehicle in the side mirror, his hand resting aggressively on the butt of his service weapon, Sarah made a calculated decision. She left the badge in the console. Tonight, she wasn't the Honorable Judge Covington. She was just Sarah, a black citizen, and she wanted to see exactly how the Brentwood Police Department treated people who didn't carry the weight of the federal government behind them. License, registration, and proof of insurance, Harrison barked, not bothering with a greeting or an explanation for the stop. He leaned heavily against her door, shining his heavy maglite flashlight directly into her eyes to disorient her. "Good evening, officer," Sarah replied calmly, her voice steady and resonant, betraying no intimidation. She blinked against the harsh beam. "My wallet is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach over and get it now. Make it quick. And no sudden moves, Harrison snapped, clearly annoyed by her precise, unbothered articulation. Sarah retrieved her driver's license and the car's registration, handing them through the window. Harrison snatched them from her fingers, his eyes darting between the plastic card and her face. Sarah Covington, he read aloud, his tone dripping with skepticism. This your car, Sarah? It is, she replied, her eyes locked onto his. And what are you doing in Brentwood at this hour? I am driving home. To the address listed on that license. Harrison scoffed, adjusting his duty belt. Right. You live in a $3 million house up on Ridgeview Drive. He shined the flashlight around the pristine interior of the Mercedes, looking for any excuse, a stray pill, a smell, a discarded wrapper. Where are you coming from? Work, Sarah answered simply. Work, Harrison echoed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. What kind of work has you dressed like a street vagrant driving a car like this? You clean offices downtown? Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened, just a fraction, but her face remained an impassive mask of judicial composure. She had faced down cartel bosses, corrupt politicians, and white-collar sociopaths. A small-town bully with a badge was nothing but a nuisance. I work in the city, Sarah said, ignoring his insult. Officer, could you please tell me why you pulled me over? You drifted over the double yellow line back there. Harrison lied effortlessly. It was the oldest trick in the book, a completely unprovable infraction used to justify a fishing expedition. And you seem a little disoriented. Have you been drinking, Sarah? Doing any drugs? I have not had a drop of alcohol, nor have I consumed any drugs, Sarah stated, her tone shifting from polite to authoritative. And I did not drift over the center line. I would like my citation, if you are writing one, so I may be on my way. Harrison leaned closer, his face inches from the window, the smell of stale coffee and peppermint gum wafting into the car. He wasn't used to defiance, he was used to fear. The fact that this woman was completely unbothered by his presence felt like a direct assault on his authority. Listen here, Harrison growled, dropping any pretense of professionalism. I ask the questions. You don't tell me when you can leave. Step out of the vehicle. Sarah didn't move. Officer, I am perfectly safe to drive. I have provided my documents. Unless you are ordering me out of the vehicle under Pennsylvania v. Mims, I would prefer to stay in my car. Harrison froze. The legal citation hit him like a physical blow, but it only stoked his fury. A smart aleck. There was nothing Bradley Harrison hated more than a citizen who thought they knew the law better than he did. I am giving you a lawful order, Harrison shouted, his hand hovering over his taser. Get out of the damn car before I drag you out. Sarah slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. She knew the law. A police officer can order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. Resisting on the side of a dark road was a recipe for tragedy, a reality she knew all too well from the civil rights cases that crossed her desk. I am complying, she said quietly, opening the door and stepping out into the cool night air. She stood at 5'9", drawing herself up to her full height, looking the officer dead in the eye. I am out of the vehicle. Turn around and put your hands on the roof, Harrison ordered. Officer, I am unarmed, and I have committed no crime, Sarah warned, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the distinct warning of a woman who wielded immense power. I strongly suggest you think about your next actions. Hands on the roof. Sarah placed her hands on the cold metal of her car roof. She felt Harrison's step uncomfortably close behind her. He kicked her feet apart, a little too roughly, nearly causing her to lose her balance. I'm going to search this vehicle, Harrison announced, already reaching for the door handle. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle, Sarah stated loudly and clearly. You have no probable cause. You have no warrant. The traffic stop does not grant you the right to search my property without reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime, which you do not have. Harrison slammed the car door shut and spun her around, grabbing her upper arm with a bruising grip. You think you're a lawyer or something? You think reading a Wikipedia page makes you an expert? I smell marijuana. That gives me all the probable cause I need. You smell no such thing, and we both know it, Sarah shot back, her patience finally fracturing. The sheer audacity, the effortless way he fabricated a crime to violate her Fourth Amendment rights was infuriating. It was everything she fought against in her courtroom, manifesting right in front of her. That's it. You're going away, Harrison snarled. He whipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Before Sarah could process his escalation, he twisted her left arm violently behind her back. A sharp spike of pain shot through her shoulder, but Sarah bit the inside of her cheek, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a cry. "Stop resisting," Harrison yelled, a phrase he reflexively shouted to justify his violence, despite Sarah standing completely still. He clamped the cold steel around her left wrist, ratcheting it down so tightly it immediately pinched her skin and cut off her circulation. He yanked her right arm back, securing the second cuff. "You are making a monumental mistake," Sarah said, her voice ice cold. "You are arresting me without cause. You are violating my civil rights." "Tell it to the judge, sweetheart," Harrison mocked, practically shoving her toward the back of his cruiser. He opened the rear door and roughly forced her inside, pushing her head down with unnecessary force. As the door slammed shut, Sarah was plunged into the claustrophobic darkness of the police cruiser's back seat. The hard plastic seat offered no comfort, and the cuffs dug agonizingly into her wrists. She took a deep breath, steadying her racing heart. She was a federal judge. She was a woman of immense privilege and power. Yet in the dark, bound in steel, she felt the terrifying, helpless vulnerability that so many Black Americans experienced every single day. Harrison climbed into the driver's seat, whistling a tuneless melody. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. One in custody, transporting to the precinct." "Copy that, Unit 4, the dispatcher crackled back. During the 15-minute drive to the Brentwood police station, Harrison couldn't resist gloating. He adjusted the rearview mirror so he could look at Sarah in the back. "You people always think you can talk your way out of it," Harrison sneered over the hum of the engine. "Coming to my town, driving a car you probably paid for with dirty money, quoting the Constitution like you actually know what it means. It's pathetic." Sarah remained silent. Every word he spoke was a nail in his own coffin. She was mentally drafting the internal affairs report, the civil rights lawsuit, and the federal inquiry she was about to rain down upon his head. She would not argue with a fool. She would let the fool hang himself. The cruiser pulled into the brightly lit sally port of the Brentwood precinct. Harrison dragged her out of the car by her cuffed arms, ignoring her wince of pain. He marched her through the heavy metal doors and into the sterile, fluorescent-lit booking room. Behind the high desk sat Desk Sergeant Greg Simmons, a weary-looking man with graying hair who was counting down the days to his pension. He looked up as Harrison hauled Sarah into the room. "What do we got, Brad?" Simmons asked, typing his login credentials into the computer. "DUI refusal, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and suspected narcotics trafficking," Harrison rattled off proudly. "Caught her swerving in a Benz up near Ridgeview. Cop an attitude the second I walked up. Pulled the 'I know my rights' card." Simmons frowned, looking down at Sarah. Despite the messy bun and the sweatpants, she didn't look like a drug runner. She stood perfectly straight, her head held high, projecting an aura of absolute authority that made the seasoned sergeant momentarily uncomfortable. "Name?" Simmons asked. "Sarah Covington," she replied clearly. Simmons typed it in. "Address?" She gave him her Ridgeview Drive address. Simmons paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. That's a heavily gated community, ma'am." "Yes, it is," Sarah said. "And if Officer Harrison had bothered to check, my identification proves I reside there." "Empty your pockets," Harrison ordered, ignoring the exchange. "My hands are cuffed behind my back," Sarah pointed out dryly. Harrison muttered an expletive, walked behind her, and patted her down aggressively. Finding nothing but a chapstick, he threw it onto the desk. "Her purse is in her car. I had it impounded. We'll tear it apart tomorrow." You impounded my vehicle? Sarah's eyes flashed with real anger. Her judicial credentials were in the center console. She had planned to reveal them at the precinct, but now her badge was sitting in an impound lot across town. Sure did, Harrison smiled. Procedure for a DUI arrest. I demand my phone call, Sarah said, looking directly at Sergeant Simmons, recognizing him as the only person in the room with a shred of sense. Now, Simmons looked at Harrison, who shrugged. Let her cry to her baby daddy. Won't change a thing. Simmons sighed, unlocking Sarah's cuffs from behind her back and resecuring one wrist to a metal bar attached to the booking desk. He pushed a heavy landline phone toward her. Sarah picked up the receiver with her free hand. She didn't have to look up the number. She knew it by heart. She dialed, waiting through 2 rings, before a groggy, deep voice answered. Hello? David? It's me, Sarah said, her voice softening just a fraction. David Sterling was not just her husband. He was a former federal prosecutor who now ran the most ruthless, high-profile civil rights litigation firm in the state. He was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who had bankrupted entire municipalities over police misconduct. Sarah? It's midnight. Where are you? The sleep vanished from David's voice, instantly replaced by sharp alertness. I am currently handcuffed to a desk at the Brentwood Police Department, Sarah said clearly, making sure her voice carried across the room to where Harrison was filling out paperwork. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, a low, dangerous sound escaped David, a dry, humorless chuckle. You're at Brentwood? David asked, his voice deadly calm. Who arrested you? Sarah looked at the name tag on the chest of the grinning cop. An Officer Bradley Harrison. He claims I was swerving, then fabricated a smell of marijuana to attempt an illegal search, and arrested me when I refused. Did you tell them who you are? My credentials were in the console of the car. Officer Harrison had the vehicle impounded before I could retrieve them. Sarah. David sighed, a mix of relief that she was safe and utter disbelief at the stupidity of the police. Does this Harrison idiot have any idea what he's just done? I don't believe so, David. I'm putting on a suit. I will be there in 20 minutes, David promised, the predatory edge of a lawyer smelling blood in the water bleeding through the phone. Do not say another word to them. And Sarah? Yes? Let them keep digging their grave. I'm bringing the shovel. Sarah hung up the phone. She leaned back against the counter, adjusting her posture. She looked at Officer Harrison, who was smirking at her over his paperwork, completely oblivious to the catastrophic storm that was currently speeding toward his precinct. Lawyer boyfriend coming to bail you out? Harrison mocked. Something like that, Sarah replied, a faint, chilling smile touching the corners of her mouth. I hope you enjoy your current rank, Officer Harrison. You're going to have a lot of free time to reflect on it very soon. Headlights cut through the thick marine layer, outside the Brentwood precinct, precisely 22 minutes after the phone call. A sleek, black Audi A8 aggressively hopped the curb, bypassing the visitor lot to park directly in the spot reserved for the shift commander. David Prescott stepped out into the damp air. He was a man who commanded the very atmosphere around him, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit that he had thrown on with practiced, urgent speed. As a senior partner at Prescott, Miller and Associates, a top-tier civil rights litigation firm in Los Angeles, known for tearing municipal budgets to shreds, he destroyed corrupt careers for a living. Inside the station, Officer Bradley Lawson was loudly recounting his version of the arrest to a wide-eyed rookie, heavily embellishing the details of Sarah's supposed belligerence and resistance. Behind the high desk, Sergeant Simmons watched the main doors, a growing pit of unease forming in his stomach. David pushed through the heavy glass doors of the precinct. He didn't merely walk, he stalked toward the front desk, his expensive leather shoes echoing with a sharp, rhythmic finality on the linoleum floor. Can I help you, sir? Simmons asked, sitting up straighter, instinctively recognizing a predator in his territory. I am here for my wife, Sarah Covington, David stated, his voice a low, perfectly modulated rumble, that immediately silenced the idle chatter in the room. He slapped a heavy, gold-embossed business card onto the high counter. I am also her legal counsel. I expect her released from those handcuffs in exactly 10 seconds. Or, my next call is to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Lawson scoffed loudly, stepping forward and hooking his thumbs into his duty belt. Look, pal, I don't care what kind of fancy ambulance chaser you think you are. Your wife is being processed for DUI refusal, resisting a lawful order, and suspected narcotics trafficking. She stays chained to that desk until I say she moves. David didn't even turn his head to acknowledge Lawson. He kept his cold, unblinking eyes locked on the desk sergeant. Sergeant, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are currently holding a federal official against her will, without a shred of probable cause. Every single second, she remains secured to that metal bar. The financial and legal liability to your municipality multiplies by a factor you cannot comprehend. Simmons blinked heavily. A federal official? Lawson let out a harsh, mocking laugh. She's a night shift cleaner, Greg. Look at the way she's dressed. Sarah sat perfectly still, observing the exchange with the cold, analytical detachment she utilized every day on the bench. She felt the painful pinch of the steel around her wrist, but her face remained an impassive mask. David finally turned slowly to look at Lawson. His gaze was terrifyingly blank, stripping the officer of his perceived authority instantly. You must be the arresting officer, Bradley Lawson, correct? Yeah. What of it? Lawson puffed out his chest, though his voice wavered slightly under the lawyer's intense scrutiny. In the center console of my wife's illegally impounded vehicle is a black leather wallet, David said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet, fluorescent-lit booking room. Inside that wallet are credentials issued by the United States government. She is not a cleaner, Officer Lawson. She is the Honorable Sarah Covington, sitting judge for the United States District Court. And you just physically assaulted her, unlawfully detained her, and fabricated a police report to cover your blatant racial profiling. Silence slammed into the precinct, like a physical shockwave. Simmons dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the computer keyboard, sounding like a gunshot in the dead quiet room. The young rookie standing near the water cooler suddenly looked pale and nauseous, taking a discreet step back from Lawson. Lawson's arrogant smirk froze, then slowly melted off his face. His eyes darted frantically from David, to the heavy cardstock on the desk, and finally, to the woman handcuffed to the metal bar. The worn sweatpants and faded university sweatshirt suddenly didn't look like vagrant clothes. They looked exactly like the off-duty attire of someone who possessed so much power they didn't need a suit to prove it. You're lying, Lawson stammered, his voice losing its arrogant swagger entirely, dropping an octave into pure uncertainty. She would have said something. She would have flashed a badge right away. I informed you clearly that I had committed no crime, Sarah spoke up, her voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. I informed you that you lacked probable cause. You explicitly chose to ignore my statements, fabricate a fictitious odor of narcotics, and employ unnecessary physical force. I wanted to see exactly how your department operates when you don't believe the person you've targeted has the power to destroy you. Uncuff her. Now. David's command cracked like a whip across the room. Simmons scrambled out from behind the desk, nearly tripping over his own chair. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped his key ring twice, before finally unlocking the heavy steel cuff. Sarah rubbed her bruised wrist, her expression unreadable as she stood to her full height. I want the chief of police down here immediately, David demanded, pulling a small notebook from his breast pocket. I don't care if he is deep in REM sleep. Wake him up. I also demand the immediate release of my client's vehicle from impound, the initiation of a strict preservation order on all dashcam and body cam footage from tonight, and a copy of the preliminary arrest report. If a single frame of that video goes missing, or if an audio file is corrupted, I will personally see to it that everyone in this room faces federal obstruction charges. You can't just come in here making demands, Lawson started, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. The crushing reality of the situation was wrapping around his throat like a vice. He hadn't just crossed a professional line. He had sprinted over a legal minefield. Arresting a federal judge on violently fabricated charges was a career-ending, potentially prison-earning catastrophe. "Shut up, Brad," Simmons hissed, his face completely drained of color. "Just shut your damn mouth." The sergeant reached past his computer for the heavy red phone, mounted on the wall, the direct, emergency line to Chief Thomas Keller's private residence. For the next 45 minutes, the precinct transformed into a tomb of suffocating anxiety. Lawson was explicitly ordered by a frantic shift lieutenant to sit in the barren break room. He was stripped of his sidearm and badge, pending the immediate internal affairs review that David had effectively triggered with a single, brutal text message to the mayor's chief of staff. When Chief Keller finally arrived, he was half-dressed in a uniform shirt, hastily tucked into civilian trousers. His face flushed with panicked exertion. He took one look at David Prescott, recognized him instantly from a massive Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit that had nearly bankrupted a neighboring county 3 years prior, and visibly swallowed hard. "Judge Covington," Chief Keller said, rushing forward, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. "I cannot express how deeply, profoundly sorry I am for this appalling misunderstanding. This is absolutely not how the Brentwood Police Department operates." "It is exactly how your department operates, Chief Keller," Sarah replied coldly. A junior officer had just sprinted into the station, carrying her recovered purse from the impound lot. She reached inside and withdrew her federal credentials, letting the heavy gold badge catch the harsh overhead light. "Your officer targeted me based entirely on my race, fabricated a traffic violation, lied about establishing probable cause, and utilized excessive physical force. The only misunderstanding tonight is that he picked the wrong citizen to victimize." Chief Keller wiped cold sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "We will handle this internally, Your Honor. Immediate suspension without pay, pending absolute termination. You have my solemn word." David stepped smoothly in front of his wife, blocking the chief's approach. "Internal handling is drastically insufficient. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, my office will file a massive civil rights lawsuit against this precinct, the city of Brentwood, and Officer Lawson, personally. I am going to subpoena every single traffic stop Bradley Lawson has executed in the last decade. We are going to rip open this department's history of racial profiling, and we are going to gut it completely." Sarah turned her back on the panicked chief and walked toward the automatic doors. "Let's go, David. I have to review case files for Monday." She paused at the threshold, looking back toward the glass windows of the break room. Lawson sat inside at a plastic table, his head buried in his hands, watching his pension, his freedom, and his entire life evaporate before his eyes. "Hard karma is an absolute principle of the universe, officer," Sarah said quietly, though her voice carried perfectly through the silent station. "Remember that." Monday morning arrived in Brentwood, with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. The affluent, quiet suburb awoke not to the usual sounds of landscapers and expensive coffee machines, but to a swarm of satellite news trucks parked haphazardly across the manicured lawns of the municipal building. At exactly 8 o'clock, David Prescott walked into the federal courthouse downtown and filed a devastating 120-page civil rights lawsuit. The document did not merely target Bradley Lawson. It indicted the entire Brentwood Police Department, naming Chief Thomas Keller, the shift supervisor Sergeant Greg Simmons, and Mayor Jonathan Pierce as co-defendants in a massive conspiracy to violate the civil rights of minority citizens. David possessed a terrifying legal mind, and he had spent the weekend armed with countless pots of black coffee and 3 junior associates, pulling every publicly available record of Lawson's previous traffic stops. The data was a damning mosaic of undeniable racial profiling. By noon, Mayor Jonathan Pierce was barricaded inside his office, watching his political career disintegrate on live television. The dashcam footage from Lawson's cruiser which David had legally secured through an emergency federal preservation order, was leaked to the press by an anonymous source within the mayor's own panicked administration. The entire country watched in high definition as a smug, aggressive patrolman violently handcuffed a perfectly calm, compliant federal judge over a fabricated charge. The local police union, usually a formidable wall of absolute protection for its members, immediately recognized a losing battle. Frank Donovan, the famously aggressive union president, held a brief press conference at 1 o'clock. Sweating profusely under the glare of camera flashes, Donovan stated that while the union believed in due process, Officer Lawson's actions did not reflect the training or values of the Brotherhood. With that single, carefully vetted sentence, Lawson was completely abandoned. He was financially and legally cut loose, left to drown in the torrential storm he had started. Within 48 hours, the Brentwood Police Department capitulated entirely. Chief Thomas Keller, facing immense public and political pressure, submitted his immediate resignation. Bradley Lawson was officially terminated without pay and stripped of his pension rights, his badge unceremoniously tossed into an evidence box. But the loss of his career was merely the opening act of his punishment. The true devastation arrived 3 weeks later. Federal investigators from the Department of Justice, triggered by Sarah Covington's unlawful arrest, descended upon Brentwood. They weren't just looking at the night of the incident. They were looking at Lawson's entire 12-year career. During a warranted search of Lawson's private residence and a secondary rented storage unit, FBI agents uncovered a horrifying secret that elevated the case from a standard civil rights violation to a major federal felony. Lawson had been keeping trophies, driver's licenses, personal trinkets, and undocumented cash illegally seized from undocumented immigrants and minority drivers he had threatened and let go over the years. He had operated under the assumption that his victims were too frightened or marginalized to ever report him. He never calculated the risk of pulling over a woman who held the power of the federal bench. The criminal trial of the United States versus Bradley Lawson began the following autumn. It was the most highly publicized trial the district had seen in a decade. Lawson, stripped of his uniform and forced to wear an ill-fitting gray civilian suit, looked drastically different from the arrogant predator who had patrolled the midnight streets. He appeared shrunken, pale, and constantly trembling. He sat at the defense table, watching in silent horror as prosecutor Robert Jennings systematically dismantled his life. Sarah Covington took the witness stand on the third day of the trial. She did not wear her judicial robes, opting instead for a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue suit. She answered every question with cold, clinical precision. She did not raise her voice. She did not show anger. She simply recounted the facts of the night, letting the unvarnished truth echo through the cavernous courtroom. Her complete lack of vindictiveness only made Lawson's brutal, unprovoked aggression look that much more sociopathic. The fatal blow to Lawson's defense came when his own attorney desperately tried to argue that Lawson genuinely believed he smelled narcotics, attempting to justify the escalation. Prosecutor Jennings immediately played the audio from the precinct's booking room, clearly capturing Lawson bragging to his colleagues about fabricating the charge just to teach her a lesson about quoting the Constitution. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was dead silent. Guilty on all counts, including deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and federal evidence tampering. Judge William Montgomery, a stern, unforgiving man known for his harsh sentencing of corrupt officials, looked down from the high bench at the trembling former police officer. It was a mirror image of the power dynamic Lawson had so deeply enjoyed exploiting on the streets. But this time, the authority was legitimate, and the karma was absolute. "Mr. Lawson," Judge Montgomery's voice boomed through the microphone, heavy with disgust. "You were handed a badge, a firearm, and the profound trust of your community. You weaponized that trust to terrorize those you deemed beneath you. You acted as a predator under the guise of a protector. You believed that because you wore a uniform, you were entirely above the law. Today, The law proves you wrong. The gavel came down with a sharp, echoing crack that sounded like a gunshot. Bradley Lawson was sentenced to 180 months, 15 years in a federal penitentiary. As the U.S. Marshals stepped forward to take him into custody, Lawson instinctively pulled his arms away. "Hands behind your back," the marshal ordered, his voice devoid of any sympathy. Lawson squeezed his eyes shut as his arms were wrenched forcefully behind him. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists, pinching his skin. It was the exact same agonizing pressure Sarah Covington had felt on the side of that dark road. But for Lawson, the cuffs were not temporary. They were the permanent, suffocating reality of his new life. He was led out of the courtroom through the side door, his head bowed, his legacy entirely reduced to a cautionary tale of hubris and bigotry. A few miles away, inside the quiet, dignified chambers of the federal courthouse, the Honorable Sarah Covington adjusted her heavy black robe. She reviewed the case file on her desk, picked up her pen, and prepared to enter the courtroom. The system was flawed, deeply broken in places, and heavily scarred by the prejudices of men like Bradley Lawson. But as she walked out to the bench, the bailiff calling the room to order, she knew she would keep fighting to fix it. One ruling, one trial, and one absolute truth at a time. Justice is rarely swift, but when it arrives, its weight is absolute. Bradley Lawson learned that true authority is a privilege, not a weapon, and the badge provides no shield against the objective truth. Sarah Covington continued to serve, her resolve strengthened by the ordeal. The shadows of bias cannot withstand the blinding light of accountability, proving that hard karma always collects its debts from those who abuse their power.